Call to order the Maplewood City Council Manager Workshop for 5:30 Monday, September 10th. How's everybody doing? Good, good. All right. It's kind of the after Labor Day lull. It's actually pretty warm out, though. Getting there, getting a little coolish. Tonight, for our workshop, we have two main items. First, we're going to talk about the branding Maplewood next steps, and then we're going to talk about repeat nuisance call service fee. First, we will have a roll call by the city manager, Melinda Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor Slawik. Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Abrams?
Here.
Councilmember Juniman?
Here.
Councilmember Zhang?
Here.
And Mayor Slawik.
Here. So thank you. Approval of agenda. Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved by Abrams and seconded by Smith. Approval of agenda. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hearing ayes all, the agenda is approved. So item D, there's no unfinished business. That brings us to E, new business. And first is branding Maplewood next steps. So City Manager Coleman, do you want to introduce
Sure.
that?
Thank you, Mayor Slawik, members of the City Council. The Communication Division is, Joe in particular tonight, Joe Sheeran, is going to talk a little bit about how we deliver a clear and coherent message to our community members and businesses about who we are, our attributes and our values. And so I think tonight, this was meant to be sort of a carry-off from our retreat we had back in March, I think it was. And we're really looking for feedback from you on a branding strategy, what that means to you. Joe has some ideas to kind of generate that discussion. We don't have any preconceived outcomes that we're looking for. We're really actually looking for your input. This is one of those situations where we want to know what you think. We really do want to hear what your thoughts are on this. And this can be as simple as kind of continuing doing what we're doing. It can go as far as working with somebody who could help us do rebranding. In particular, we're working on some pretty big things, such as Gladstone and the North End study, where it might be just a little bit too soon to have a marketing plan, but I'm not the marketing guru of the city, so I don't know that. But these are kind of some of the things that we want to have a little conversation with you this evening. And so, Mayor, I would ask that you call on Joe Sheeran to start his presentation.
Welcome to the council, Mr. Sheeran. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I think it's been a while since we initially had this conversation. Several months ago, we have a slideshow ready to go here. But just as Melinda said, we are looking to do a little more than what we're doing. But what that exactly is, that's what we're looking to council for some advice on. So one of the things that I think we need to do is overview.
Nope. Is it working?
Right. See, so maybe we need to turn the mic on the brand. And then the other thing is, I just want to open this up so we have the full, you can have the full screen
He's
for
got
it here.
game show look
Jeez.
now. He's pulled the mic. And,
Okay, all right, sounds
just gonna-
good. So it's been a while
we're gonna
since
play,
we've had this conversation
Who's
initially.
next?
So we're coming back to it.
Joe,
I don't get
I'd like
whole
to buy a
lot-
vowel.
I don't get a whole lot of time up here, so I have to milk it as best I can. So what we want to do is start out with the slideshow and start out with the overview of kind of where we left off. And we made a couple of big assumptions that day based on our internal conversation, but also based on the community survey that we had sent out. So essentially what we're going to be looking at is the market. Who are we looking to attract? What we have to attract, what are our main characteristics, what are our assets, and then where are our opportunities or our risks. These could be looked at in both ways. So we'll start out with the market. As you guys have identified in that meeting, we think our target market for a branding strategy is young families, the healthcare institutions, and small, medium-sized businesses. As we know, we're working with the Chamber of Commerce, the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce to attract and figure out what small businesses are looking for in our community. So we think that is the market. The other thing we wanted to do is, in that meeting, we talked about values and characteristics that are assets for us. One is a central location. We could get to downtown St. Paul in about 10 minutes, downtown Minneapolis in about 20, 25, depending on how many state troopers are on the road. Diverse, tight-knit communities. We have lots of little pockets of communities and we have some diversity, and we have a real sense of community here. We have, thanks to your leadership, a progressive leadership that honors the past but is willing to look into the future and make some tough decisions, as we saw in the last year. And then overall, we have a good quality of life. Our survey told us at least more than 80% rate the quality of life here as high. Some of the assets we have are a developed community or a developed infrastructure for medical care, and this is confirmed by the Perkins and Will study. And we have a flexible redevelopment plan in our 2040 comprehensive plan. We realize that we have a mature, built-out community, and we're going to have to make some, and in order to grow, we're going to have to grow from within, and we're going to have to repurpose some of those older structures, some of those older communities for new uses and new purposes. And again, Perkins and Will, the study identified that we have a lot of the assets that developers desire, especially because we have such a strong business economic development engagement plan already in process, and we're willing to do some of the things that the businesses are looking for us to do. Some of opportunities and risks, as we know we have a good school system here, but how do we make sure that folks who are thinking about coming to this community, maybe moving out to St. Paul, that they're choosing Maplewood, not Woodbury or White Bear Lake, and we need to make sure we're really highlighting the schools and what we're doing in the schools. There's a perception of crime, which we think is a perception because 80% of the folks say they feel safe in our community, and 90% say they feel safe in their own community. So why is there a perception of crime? And we have to identify what that perception is, and try to overcome that. And then housing stock. I look at us as similar to Richfield when it comes to we're the East Metro's Richfield. We're a similar size city where we have proximity to St. Paul the way they have proximity to Maplewood, or the way they have proximity to Minneapolis. And we have a similar type of housing stock, a lot of post-war housing stock, and they're doing things to reinvest in housing. And how we do that and how we promote that is going to be real important to let folks know that we are looking to attract young families to our community. And then we have to make a decision, what do we want to promote? Do we want to promote that we're a car-friendly city, which is not a bad thing, but also highlighting the importance of, where we have a robust multimodal system with a few bus rapid transit lines scheduled for the future here. Action steps. What are we going to do? We want to establish a working group, and in that working group, we want to take a deeper dive and do some of the heavy lifting and figure out what's next. As part of that, establishing that working group, here's our proposition. What we want to do is get people at the table who have the most to gain from our success. Obviously, the schools, YMCA, MCC, health providers, St. John's, Health East, realtors. As we know from the school district, one of the biggest assets that they look for are young families want schools. So how can we work with the realtors to promote what we're doing? How can we make sure that the realtors have all of the collateral material in their hands that they need to be successful to market our city to young families? And then business owners and the community engagement and the business engagement that our E2D2 department is doing with the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce. It's nice to have those types of folks at the table. I think they are willing to come to the table based on some of the forums we've had already. And then if we're trying to attract young families, I think it's important to talk to the young families in our community about what they see are the assets in our community and why they chose here and why they want to stay here. And then again, seniors, they're still a major part of our community, and we want to make sure we have the assets in place where they're able to age in place in our own community and stay here. Some critical questions. What's been done? What has 622 done? What has 623 done? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And what's fallen flat? Where can we learn from what they did when it comes to a marketing plan and when it comes to a community engagement plan? And then this is kind of odd timing because when I first started putting this presentation together, we weren't too far in with the North End area development. But as this presentation kept getting postponed, we were able to see more of what Perkins and Will had done. And I think it's well timed because we have some market analysis. We know sort of the demographic of folks coming here. We know who our competition is around the metro. So that, I think, will really, really help us with a platform of where do we go next. And so one of the things we have to do is really dive into the things that we've identified as assets. Are they actually assets, and are they available in the community? Also, too, who are our brand ambassadors? The PD and the Fire Department and the Public Safety Division really has a strong presence in our community. They've made the inroads. They could help be a brand ambassador. A lot of people, especially young families, are connecting with our city through our Park and Rec Department. So who in our Park and Rec Department, who in those strategies can be an outward face for us, an ambassador for the community. And again, everyone has a role to play in the city and influencing, whether it's us in the communications department influencing the type of news media coverage we get, whether it's you as council talking to neighbors around influencing folks to let them know we do have a strong plan and we do have a growth platform going forward, or it's the public works folks who are literally out there knocking on doors, talking to neighbors in more informal settings, letting them know what projects are coming up. So I think we all have a role to play as ambassadors, but I think the most important thing from a communications and branding aspect is what information are we giving each of those ambassadors so they're telling the story. And then moving on here, just some last thoughts. This is the step where I'm looking for you guys some help. Do we want to do sort of the full-on, hire a PR firm, hire a branding firm, do some paid engagement, have some collateral that goes out across the metro, try to figure out who, if we're trying to attract young families, where are those young families now, and how can we get them to Maplewood? Or are those young families already in Maplewood and we get them to stay here? Or we could do a softer approach and get together in our work group, identify some branding strategies, and can use that information to continue and inform what the communications division does on a day-to-day basis through the redesign of the website, through social media, and through the videos that we're working on. And then lastly, just some other ideas to think about. You know, like I said, I brought up the Richfield presentation. I really think we should look at what they're doing. They're in a similar situation. They're having some success. They're in a little better situation because Minneapolis housing prices are just so high that people want to live in and stay in that area, and Richfield is a good option for them. And they're trying to reinvent their housing stock. And what's the financial allocation? What are we willing to spend? What should we be spending? And then our underwriters, our partners who have the most to gain from our success, whether it's realtors or the business community, what are they willing to help us when it comes to underwriting some of our, whether it's looking at a branding strategy, whether it's looking at a citywide signage plan, those types of issues. And that's the overview. Thanks to Councilmember Mary Lee Abrams for making sure that this kind of wasn't a plan that we talked about one day and sat on the shelf. She really came to us and said, what's next? What are we doing next? And she wanted some ideas, and here's, based on what we talked about that one day and based on my knowledge of communications and branding, this is a sort of a menu of options to go forward and to think about in the next 6 to 10 months.
Thank you. Good presentation. City Manager Coleman, how much time do we have for this item?
We have a lot of time.
Okay, that's what I wondered.
I think public safety directors, the DOE will need about 35 minutes.
So we have about 35, 40 minutes ourselves for this. So council, it's time to have a deeper discussion than we're used to. And I think that this is an important topic, so you should be able to speak at least probably twice, and we can go a little deeper. Go with Councilmember Smith and then Abrams.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Joe. This is good work. I'm excited about where we're heading here. When we look at marketing strategy, I think there's several things we have to consider. First is focus, and really, we look at those three audiences on the first slide. I think those are all three really good options. I think we're better off to pick one and really focus. It doesn't mean we ignore the others. It just means that the better we can talk to that one audience, the more it will resonate in some of those other related audiences. And if we try to talk to all of them, we end up saying not much. So I think that's a focus piece of it. I think maybe what I'm not seeing so far, but it's probably work that this work group might do, is what are we actually trying to do with this project? Are we trying to raise housing, housing values? Are we trying to increase new families moving in? Are we trying to increase businesses? What can we measure that we're trying to do strategically as a city? And then start to work backwards from that to then what marketing activities do we approach? I think often from a marketing perspective, we like to start right with the marketing stuff. And if we don't really have a strategic end in mind, it's hard to know then whether we've been successful or not. So related to that too then is what do we measure as we look at these things, whether that's perception, whether that's land values, et cetera. And then what does good look like within that measurement? We're looking to increase it by 2% or 20%. It's so that we can come back and take a look at that. So I think, and some of those things I'm sure are things that will work through the work group. And then the last comment I have is just on that last page of, do we take the soft approach or do we really make an investment? I think this is one of those things where we can't be half pregnant. I mean, we have to either do it or we don't. And, creating a great marketing plan that we don't tell anybody about is not the most effective use of our energies, I think. So I understand this stuff is expensive and it's going to be an investment the city would have to decide to make. But I would vote in the small v word here, that we either make the commitment to do it and really try to accomplish something, or, we've got a perfectly lovely logo and we just kind of stick with that and move on if we're not really going to do that much with it. So, thank you though. Good work. I think it's a good start.
Good comments. Councilmember Abrams and then Zhang.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Joe. I'll defer to my fellow council member who does marketing, and that's kind of what his thing is for work. I think he's got some really good ideas. One of the things that I think is important to me is the fact that we have a lot of organic things that are happening right now anyway. And so for me, it's really a matter of timing, because if I look at, we're having really one of the first meetings of our EDA tonight to talk about the levy and the EDA, and we also have coming along a workshop that hasn't been scheduled yet to talk about EDA responsibilities and possible program areas, which I see that, since I'm the chair of the EDA, really looking at what we can do to invest and reinvest in our housing stock. And so that's an organic thing that's happening. I know our city attorney was going to be coming to us with some ideas on what other cities are doing, because admittedly, we have been very inactive in terms of our EDA, and I would really like to jump that up, because I think that there are a lot of things that we can do, from small microloans to our residents to try to put in an energy efficient furnace, or to remodel, or to do something, providing plans, or maybe even a model home, or all sorts of things that we could be doing. And so I think organically, we have some of those things happening when it comes to, at least that would be addressing the young family issue. And I think your idea of picking out one of these groups is probably a very good idea. We also have this big study that we've already commissioned with Perkins and Will, because I think we need to find out what are they saying as far as that whole north end, because I think that in and of itself is an organic process that's going on right now, and it incorporates the whole transportation issue and the changes that we see coming, the housing, the businesses up in the north end. And so that's all happening. And then, I look at, our website is scheduled to be redone. I forgot what the timing on that.
Yeah, the website's scheduled for a refresh. We could start on the refresh process as early as February 2019.
Okay.
We're already, Chad Burgo and myself and Kevin are already going through the website page by page, and we have a software called Site Improve, which kind of gives us a snapshot of what goes on the page on almost a daily, weekly basis, and we're already starting the process of where is the traffic going, why are people going to our website, how are they engaging on our website, and we're also going through the process of cleaning up a lot of old stuff so that when you search our website, as we know now, Google has made us all kind of lazy. It's just type the name in and go, and if your website is not tight and your search results are not tight, people are just disengaging and going elsewhere. So we're trying to figure out how do we optimize that search so that when people go to search on our site, it's the most effective it can be.
Which is another one of the organic things that is happening here anyway. So I guess from my perspective, timing is really important. I think that it might be a little premature for us to jump into a marketing plan. We don't even know kind of what the whole purpose of that would be. And so I think that we have to look at that timing and what is going to be, I think organically it will come to us that we need some more help with this now. But we have all these other things that are coming together, and I think that there will be a very positive impact for the city as a result of those. So in terms of what I certainly like the idea of a work group. I think we have some really talented people in our city. I know that we have, reached out to our community, and we got great representatives for the EMS advisory group, for the police advisory group, and I think that I would like to kind of tap into our community and hear what they have to say. And kind of bring that together with these organic things that are happening. And obviously, if at some point down the road we need assistance, then yes, we can certainly explore that. But I think that the timing is, there's so many things happening already. I'm just concerned that we might kind of have a misstep if we try to do something like an outside consulting firm at this point in time, because we have all these other things that are changing organically. So, thanks.
Councilmember Zhang.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Joe, for the presentation. When our council first had this discussion, or when I first heard of this discussion among this council, we kind of bounced between, what was the sort of the end goal that we're trying to reach. And I know in some of the workshops that we've had, how we move forward, are we trying to respond to concerns or the needs of the residents? Or are we doing this because we're trying to attract new residents? Or are we doing this because we feel like what we have in place is inadequate? So I think how we answer those questions determines of how much we're willing or looking to invest into this. And when we first had that discussion, how I kind of looked at it was, we're a city. We offer services that residents come to us directly for, and so it is a duty of our city to have a message that characterizes who we are and how we, interact with them and how they view us, and for them to be comfortable in reaching out to us for any help, for assistance, because I think that's what our city is best served by how our city's story is being told. And so I think with that approach, I would agree with Councilmember Smith. I think if we're making the effort to follow through with our planning for the past couple of years, I think we should make it significant where the residents can see like a difference, and more than just a change in our logo, but how we interact with them too. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Juniman?
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Abrams and Councilmember Smith. I think it's going to be difficult to say one audience, though. I mean, we're probably going to have some conversations about how narrow or how broad is that audience. And I'm wondering if there's a place for us to not exactly partner, but bring in some of the wisdom from our business council to see what they think of where we are and where we might be going, because they're a different type of stakeholder, but they might be able to help us with what, from their point of view, needs addressing first. And, using the results of the BRE visits, all of that type of thing to say, okay, here's what, because I do agree with Mary Lee that we have a lot going on. And so I think the first part of it is to market what we already are without having to hire anybody else to tell anybody. I mean, I think we sometimes don't toot our own horns enough about the good things that are going on and the stuff that we're looking into. And I don't know exactly how you can get people more involved, but I do believe that after I saw the number of people who came up to that open house at the library, I think if you hit the right nerves, people do want to come and share. And sometimes they come thinking they want nothing but answers, but then when you say, no, we want your wisdom, it takes them a while to go, oh, because they're used to having the answers given to them before the questions are asked. And so I think we need to cultivate more and more of that in order to get this to go anywhere. And of course, having been the one that's been asking since 2004 for housing loans, I'm with Councilmember Abrams. Could we get on with it already? I do believe this is, and it's not just for young families either. I think there are seniors who are forced out because their houses aren't up to code, or they don't have, their heating system is antiquated or whatever. And so they're forced into a different living situation where if they had somewhere where they could borrow a little bit of money to help them get going on this kind of stuff, they could probably reside and stay here. And if you want life cycle housing, you got to keep the people around who comprise the life cycle. So I think some of these things are going on, but let's try and, how do we market those things to the people already here? And from that, if you have a really thriving community, people kind of come here because of what they see, what they hear about, and it's not just the schools, it's what do we offer in recreation programs? Our kids' city events. We are really attracting people, but how do we get that out in a bigger way to let people know who we are, what we have already, and we are moving forward. And we want this to become more in the future, but I agree it's way too early to hire anyone else to try and market us. We have plenty of marketing ourselves we can do. We'll just make Joe do that. But I think there's a lot going on here, and it's how to get it out there, of course, and it's how to jumpstart and actually start doing things like housing loans. And if you only have enough money to make 3 loans the first year, then you do 3 loans. You assess the applicants and who needs it the worst, or what's the biggest bang for the buck, or whatever. Because once you start that kind of thing, it kind of grows on itself, and people catch on, and we will have greater latitude to say, okay, we're going to put this much money into it because people are responding. It gives us a way to build the program.
Thank you. I'm going to make some comments, and then we can do round 2 as people are already here. Very good comments, Council. It's interesting to hear where people are at, and I'm somewhat on similar pages. I just think back to Joe when the school district had the realtors in and said kind of what you said is, if you're going to buy a house in Woodbury or White Bear or Maplewood, and does that correlate to the schools, or what does it correlate to? Part of it is the schools, and I understand. So I understand they're going to have a major facelift in 622 because of the referendum. But I like your idea of having the group meet and talk about those, because we are interlinked with the schools, right? If people don't want to move here for our schools, that's a problem. If, as the realtors would say, though, maybe it's not the schools, maybe it's the city, right? And so it's a conundrum of trying to figure out what is going on and what attracts people. And when I say, would it be the city, we know we have a good quality of life. We know there's a lot of happy people here, but we also know we can do better. So, City Manager Coleman, my drumbeat is when we go around and we have these code enforcement issues and people drive around the neighborhoods and they say, oh my gosh, I don't want to move where there's a house with grass this long, or there's things falling apart, or they're parked like this, or there's 25 cars, all over the front lawn. Is we have to continue to get our codes enforced, and so people are attracted to our community when they drive around. We have many, many, many beautiful parts. I mean, you go from South Maplewood down where Councilmember Smith lives to up where Councilmember Abrams lives, all of us, where everybody lives. There are many, many parts, but we have to keep our city looking good. And that would be my other comment about rental homes, because we have families that are here, have neighbors that are renting, and there aren't a lot of controls over that. So one thing, I think, if we're going to market ourselves, we've got to be our best self. Just like if you're going to go to the prom, you're going to buy the really pretty dress, right? Or the really great tuxedo, or whatever. And you're going to look your best. And so I think the city's got to look its best when we're trying to attract people. And again, so that would go to the comments about the EDA and the housing loans and giving people some money to fix things up, because monies can be hard to come by, especially for older folks. And so giving them that incentive. I like the working group idea. I would, of course, I always ask if we would have a council member on there of some kind and who might be interested in doing that. I'm split between who you focus on, because if you did just young families, then what about the businesses? Because we know we're going to have these businesses coming sort of to the English and Frost area, but we also need to attract families. So I'm not sure if you can go with one focus or if you might need to broaden that out. I think that on timing, where several members talked about the timing, it does feel like we're building, but we're not quite there. As we, like the Lions, I always call them the Lions, the Moose property, as that gets redeveloped and we find a developer, and if there's another development, and we talked about this, City Manager Coleman, right in that area, that's going to be like, wow, people are going to really want to come here. That's getting cleaned up. It's going to be new, but we don't really know what's going to go there yet, right? And so it feels like we're just a little bit before we should be. The other thing for me is when I go to meetings and we have Maplewood, my fellow Maplewood residents on things, somehow, and we have other cities on there too, is I want people to be proud of our city. And there is this little chip we have from years gone by of things that have happened to Maplewood that our residents have a hard time letting go of. And this is a council that can just turn that around. We've done a tremendous amount to build pride in our city, but the marketing piece and us internally getting the city together is about pride, right? And we want to be proud of our city. I'll tell you who, when we go to these meetings, those White Bear people, man, they are just tigers about their city and what's happening there. And that's what I'm hoping, as in marketing, we can all, be doing this, because we have so many great things that a lot of cities don't have. Everything from 3M to Fish Creek to Tulu courts, and so I don't know if any of that's helpful, but I think it's you're going in a great direction. I think you've asked some really good things, and I think that we still need to ask more questions, and we're just a little bit out from getting on top of this, but you're getting us a lot closer. Do you want to respond to
thank you,
all
Mayor
of
and
our-
Council. Just to kind of respond to everybody so far, I do agree with all of your comments, and it is some good direction, especially on focusing in on a market and who we're going to target. And we kind of identified those 3 that one day. We've actually identified like 5 that one day, so I figured I'd narrow it down to 3, knowing that it'd be narrowed down even more. And I do agree there are a lot of great things that are happening, and we're kind of at that, not wait and see, but we're right ahead of it, which I think is good that we need to keep thinking about it, because what I worry about is there's what's going on in the north end. There's the Frost English corridor that's happening, and there are other things that are going on more organically with the redevelopment money. Right now, the Met Council says projects a goal of 500 housing units, I believe it is, for affordable housing. The governor just came out. The governor's task force identified ways to keep people in their houses, ways to increase home ownership. So there are a lot of things going on, not only here in Maplewood from a state level. What I think I'm hearing you guys say, and maybe I'm jumping the ship on this, is might be a little early before we bring a big consulting firm in or anything like that, but keep going down this road. What I want to do is tie all of these things together into one message. So it's not the North End here and Frost English here and housing development here. It's a one Maplewood message. Maplewood's moving, whether it's moving forward together, it's one message. Because I think even though those things are happening organically, communications and coordination with being our best selves need to drive the bus on this one. So I get what you're saying about it might be too early to put a full plan together, but I want to be careful too. Is all of these initiatives, all of these projects start to take off, that they are tied together somehow, because they're all really different. But I think we need to tie them together in some kind of marketing or some kind of branding initiative.
Yeah, well said. I think that was really good. I think maybe something I was thinking, but the way you said it about being together, maybe one Maplewood. As we know, there's a theme out there right now, one Minnesota, but it would help us to pull together, particularly with our, some kind of branding with our shape and our size. Councilmember Smith and then Juniman.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would say our shape is one of the things that people first talk to me about, and it takes something out of the Austin book of keep Maplewood weird. They always talk about the weird shape, right? But anyway, I digress. As I was listening to Councilmember Abrams speak, I think what I was describing about we have to decide what the what is before we start talking about the strategy. I think that Mary Lee was describing the what, which is that we're doing a tremendous amount of revitalization, whether it's housing, business development, Gladstone North End, the rental work that we're starting on. All of these kinds of things are about taking a mid-century first-ring suburb and revitalizing it for the future, for the kinds of people and businesses that would be living there in the 21st century, and in a location that can't be beat, right? So, I think that's sort of a what. That's the beginnings of a what that can get really focused eventually onto something around sort of a renewal, a revitalization, those kinds of things. But I also really liked what Councilmember Juniman said about, we have these things going, and there's a truth to them. And whatever we do market has to be true. We can't market our way into reality. Our product, which is our city, has to actually pay off what we're saying it does. Yeah. And so I think it's very important that we are cautious to make sure that the things that we are talking about are not aspirational, but are reality.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I want to get to, because again, these are things where we see our city, these are perceptions we have of our city, but
Sure.
Are they reality? Are they really an asset that
Right.
we actually have?
I always think about this motel we stayed in Wisconsin at a wedding once, and it was this total dump, and they had one of those old rusty signs with the arrow, the light up arrow, and it said, "We only look expensive," out in front of the motel. And I thought, this is not reality. A couple other quick things. Councilmember Juniman said it'd be hard to get down to one target. I will tell you, every organization, every company, every business I've ever worked with has a hard time getting down to one target. It's difficult, but it is, I think, really critical that we focus that, because, for example, to take kind of where the mayor was going, if we did choose to focus on young families, that message will also resonate with businesses because they want to be where young families are moving to. It will also resonate with young people or young single people because they would like to be in good quality housing where families are wanting to move. Like, there is derivative benefits to those things. It is hard to get down to one. And when you do get down to one, it doesn't mean you're excluding those others as people you want to talk to. It just means that you're really trying to focus that message. And then my last comment is, which I think is another danger for us as an organization, is that we need to remember that we are marketing the city. We are not marketing the city government. We are an element of the city, but there's a whole lot of residents who never talk to anyone at the city, who don't get involved in politics, don't follow what's going on at the council, and they deserve to also be part of this narrative. And, so this is a leadership role that we're taking as a council and a city staff, but it's not to just talk about the services our government provides, but really the city as a whole and a place to live. So I think that's, because of our perspective, that's an easy trap for us to start to fall into. But I'm excited about this. I think this is going to be really interesting, and I feel like we're circling around something. And frankly, from my perspective, I think the timing is good. I don't think we need a consultant to do some of the strategic work, but I think we will probably need an agency at some point to make it real. And that might be something sooner rather than later.
And that is the ask. How much, and one, we want to identify, we talked about it in that meeting, young families, because young families are kind of the, who doesn't want somebody who's going to come to their community and be there the next 60 years or so. But is that our market? So we have to decide that. And then the next thing is, if we do that, who do we market to? Do we market to the folks here so they stay? Or are we trying to cherry pick folks who are, in a condo in downtown St. Paul right now, or are, a condo in downtown Minneapolis, and they're looking for a place to raise their family? Who's our market? Where are
Sure.
they?
And it could be young families of a certain income range who are looking to buy their first homes, who work on the east side. You can really narrow down that focus to, which helps then drive a strategy.
Good comments. Councilmember Juniman?
Sorry, thank you. I think there's a couple things that we could do, like right now almost. And one of them is never lose the focus of a neighborhood, because we've had strong neighborhoods traditionally, and we need to keep that moving. And I think it's broken down a little bit from what it used to be, and it's part of people's lifestyle and the whole thing. But if you move into a neighborhood that has the tradition of being a neighborhood, it stays that way. And an example is just south of us, just south of Roseland, there's a nice little neighborhood that had been kind of turning over, and they were sort of just floating. People weren't knowing each other, and it just took one firecracker to move in. And she has just revitalized the whole sense of neighborhood. They're always walking together. They're always sitting out, somebody has their girl going, somebody else will go, oh, I think we'll go home and get my, it's that kind of, it's old-fashioned neighborhood, if you would, brought forward to now, so it can be done. And I think we have a long history of good neighborhoods, so we need to be doing something about keeping it that way and making that part of our brand, because it isn't everywhere anymore. And in our particular neighborhood anywhere, the staying power is pretty heavy, because we live in the older part of the neighborhood. There's a newer, relatively speaking, part north of us, and then a newer part even further north. And people actually will stay in our part of the neighborhood till the house goes up for sale north of us. And then when they outgrow that one, they want to go further up where the bigger ones are yet. And so there's a way to generate that. People are interested in that. They love it. And so I think we need to really help feed that particular part of our brand. And then I think we need to get broader in the Gladstone piece, because even people who live in Gladstone are still looking at it in pieces. And I'd like to see if we can't pull that out a little bit. They're already, the people that responded to me are very happy about the Gladstone house that's going to see the wrecking ball, just so that's not sitting there. But then when you tell them about, well, that property is going to be hooked together and that we could get more development, they're like, oh, they're just thinking about the piece of property that Gladstone house is sitting on. So I don't know how we counteract that, but I think we need to feed it more even into that neighborhood. And the Frost English Silver Project has attracted some people from other places, and they say, wow. And one of the things everybody has noticed that I bring over there is the savanna across the street. That is a huge drawing piece, just huge. And it's fantastically beautiful. And it's a great place to exercise. And so that kind of a thing, one of the ways you can tie us together is, thank you very much, 1993 open space referendum. We have those preserves in every neighborhood. And so, whether it's in Fish Creek or in Gladstone, there's that piece that you can put into your life, no matter what stage you're at, no matter where you're living. there's one that you can focus on. And I do know that in the whole parks plan and then the open space piece of that, that one of the focal points was, we're kind of divided now, and they call, for lack of a better, 5 districts, bigger than a neighborhood, smaller than a city. And for the sake of open space, at least one piece in each one of those 5 districts must be accessible, must have the right kind of walking paths. So we're focusing on that, and that's every age. So I think that's something we can capitalize on. The other thing I would like us to point out is that we do have 2 school districts, and while Roseville's smaller, I can tell you it affects the real estate in our part of the city. And so I think we need to pull them into the conversation. What's successful, what isn't, that type of thing, because while it is called Roseville Area Schools for a reason, and I think we can get that pulled together a little bit so that it's, no matter where you choose to live in Maplewood, you're going to have a strong school. I really think we need to focus on that. Okay, I'm done now. I'll be quiet.
So I'm going to say a few comments on Councilmember Zhang and then Abrams. And so one thing we see, which is just a reality that I think we really have to look at, is the growing diversity of our community. You know, today we were in a meeting and Councilmember Abrams was there, and they had passed a petition around their neighborhood, and they said, you know, a lot of people in our neighborhood don't speak English, and we're trying to get them to sign this petition on this issue, and we're having a hard time communicating, but they understood in a variety of ways what that issue was, and they signed on. And so I'm going to say 3 separate things. And then also today, we had someone write us about, what about doing a welcome packet for our neighbors, all neighbors, but particularly people of diversity that maybe have never owned a home, never had to mow a lawn, never had to do all those things. I remember when we had our first home and you're trying to figure it all out. You know, would that be helpful? And then the schools are 60, 70, 80% diverse now. So those young families, they're a growing population that's very diverse, whether it's, you know, Hmong, Karen, Latino. So when we're marketing, if you're marketing to young families, our young families look different than they did in the 1950s or the 60s or the 70s, a long time ago. So we really have to think about that, and we could, if we don't pay attention to that and we just market to white, middle-class people, it's just not going to work. And so just giving some thought to that.
No,
Councilmember Zhang? Or,
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, for bringing it up. I think one of the things that we have in the package here was, you know, looking at the next decade and anticipating the number of demographic changes. So, you know, cultural changes, age-wise, change in people's professions and how they get to work, how they work. And so I really would like to thank the mayor for, you know, bringing up the issue of diversity, because, you know, it's just something that not many people just have at the top of their minds, how people perceive things. And that's why I said, I think city government had to be something that was at the forefront, because communities of color, like their conception of what the city is, the government is what they associate with city government, with being part of the city. And so when they think in their mind, I got to go to City Hall, that's where the city government is. That's how I feel treated, well or bad, when I interact with them. And so I think that's just, thank you. I would like to thank the mayor for
Sure.
bringing it up.
well, thank you. And I think of what Councilmember Juneman said in sort of that community building too, right? Is that what I hear when I'm out going door to door is, oh, so-and-so has so many cars and so-and-so does this. And no matter how the people are diverse or not, is trying to build our community, as opposed to, I'm always surprised on the streets how many people, then there's some that don't want to tell them their neighbors, but they tell them their neighbors, or, you know, and there's all these dynamics that go on, but trying to really create that sense of community. So, and thank you, Councilmember Zhang. Councilmember Abrams, I think you're going to get the last word.
Oh, good. I want to thank my fellow council members because I think this has been a very high-level discussion about the future of our city. And I think that we are all very passionate about it. I'm also very excited about what's coming. And because I think all of us can see where we've come from and the things that are in place we're just on the cusp of some really amazing things happening for our city. And I appreciate the mayor bringing up the whole diversity issue, that our community is changing and, we don't look the same as we did before. And that's true across kind of many different cultural backgrounds, as well as we have an aging population as well. And so I think that as I see it, we are still one community. We may be a community of many, many neighborhoods. We're still one community. And I think that's really what the goal is. We can almost see it. We can almost see the message. We can almost see the focus out there. But it's almost like I've got one of those magic 8 balls on my desk, and every once in a while I shake it, and then the words come to the surface. That's kind of where I think we are right now, is that all of this is coming together. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I really appreciate the discussion that we've been able to have, and I appreciate what you've brought to us so that we can start focusing this down, narrowing this down, so that we can really plan ahead for our city, because we are one city of many neighborhoods, and I'm excited about where we're headed. So thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, council members.
Joe? Response?
I appreciate your feedback. It's, I think we've come a long way in even this brainstorming process from where we were back in March. And just being able to put it down on paper, being able to put a plan or a guidepost in place. It's the arranger. We talked about strengths. I think one of the strengths that some of us have is as an arranger. So there's a lot of different thoughts, and putting together down on a piece of paper and being willing and being flexible about coming up with a plan. I do appreciate the piece around diversity. I think that's strong. And maybe that is that definitely is an asset we have, and we could market that White Bear doesn't and that Woodbury doesn't. We are a diverse community, and when you come to our community, there's a place for you, and there's people who look like you in our community. So I appreciate the input. I will put together sort of the next steps of this plan, and hopefully we'll get something back in front of you guys soon.
Thank you. I guess Councilmember Juniman wants the last
It just
word.
came into my feeble mind. I'm slow moving. I think one place to really look at closely is Legacy Village, because that is really culturally diverse. It's age diverse, and it is absolutely a neighborhood. If you go walking up there, so many people know each other, and part of the reason they like that area is because the park that's there and the way the place is laid out. When you walk, you see your neighbors. It's really a neighborhood. I think that's something we.
All right, good, thank you, good presentation.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have, it's about 6:25, Chief Nadeau is going to come up, and we have the repeat nuisance call service fee. City Manager Coleman, do you want to tee that up?
Sure. I don't really, but
Is there a segue? The magic 8
got me
ball.
sleeping there. The magic 8 ball says,
I thought maybe we could get one of those and set it up here.
that would be kind of fun. So, Mayor and Council, at tonight's workshop, Director Nadeau is going to talk to us about a potential ordinance which seeks to enhance public safety and more effectively utilize police resources by, in certain circumstances, charging a fee to properties which have had excessive nuisance calls for service. And really, this isn't going to solve all of our problems with the types of calls we get, but it does add a tool to our toolbox. And I think that this is a good approach, and I'm really grateful that Director Nadeau has this experience and is bringing it forward for your consideration this evening.
Thank you. Director Nadeau.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council. Tonight I'd like to talk to you about a tool. It's a tool that is available in some cities. It's a tool that I actually brought into my former city, Columbia Heights. It's called kind of two different things. One is the repeat nuisance call fee. The other one is excessive calls for service fee. But When we talk about what is this proposed fee or ordinance, it's really intended to do a couple of different things. To protect public safety, health, and the welfare of the community, we want to make sure that we've got a tool if we've got an address in our city that continues to give us problems with narcotics or with drunken disorderly behavior. We want to make sure that we have our public safety resources so that they're available for the entire community and not just overly used in some places that are not doing a good job of managing their own property or being lawful. And really, it's another way for us to be able to cover the cost associated with providing public safety resources. So this proposed ordinance, which is modeled after what's found in some other cities, defines nuisance conduct, and it talks about prostitution, gambling, controlled substances, illegal use of firearms, kind of drunken disorderly conduct, and public nuisance as it might be defined by city code. I do think that it's important to talk about that just calling the police does not violate this ordinance. So we want people to contact the police department if there's a domestic assault. We want people to contact the police department if they're the victim of a crime, if they're reporting suspicious activity. So it's very specific in the types of conduct that it prohibits. So how the fees are set is that typically in an ordinance, almost like our false alarm ordinance, you're given some ability to have some conduct on your property. But when it gets to a certain point, that's when these kick in. So the proposed ordinance, as it's written, would impose a repeat nuisance service fee on the owner or occupant if the city has rendered services 3 or more times in a period of 365 days. So after the first time, and I want to get ahead of the presentation, they would get a letter that would talk about the conduct, that would talk about the fact that essentially this is one strike against them, and if there's 2 additional strikes, that they would start to be charged. The fee is set forth in a resolution approved by the City Council, so this would go on to our fee structure. An additional amount can also be imposed to reflect the salaries of police officers, community service officers, and code enforcement staff. That part of it is actually kind of rare, but in the city that I came from, as an example, we had a house that had repeated drug sales and narcotics use and violence associated with that. And so after they were charged, I think the second or third time in a year, we started to levy the cost of the officers' salaries as a part of that fee. So it ended up being thousands of dollars, and that eventually brought us the resolution that we were seeking. So I just touched on this briefly, but notice has to be provided. So each potential violation of the ordinance is served upon the owner or occupant, clearly identifying the violation and warning that subsequent violations may result in this service fee. The letter typically states that the city has the right to seek other legal remedies as well. So in that, if you go there for a narcotics search warrant, you're still liable to these criminal charges. This is a civil penalty that is in addition to whatever criminal penalties might be coming. And it's typically served by U.S. mail, and that's spelled out in the ordinance. Again, importantly, we want the people that are citizens of our community to have an avenue of appeal, and that can either be through an attorney or it can be through the City Council. In the city that I came from, it was the City Council. And so if somebody got this letter and they didn't think that for whatever reason they'd been treated fairly, they could bring it to the City Council. In the time that I was in Columbia Heights, this might have happened 2 or 3 different times. I think it was there was a landlord that came, and we had a lot of problems in his building, and he wasn't really appealing what had happened. He just was not wanting to pay for it. So in that notice that we send to them saying that you have a violation, they have a 10-day appeal. 10 days to file an appeal. And again, how a city treats that would be subject to how the ordinance is written. So how is this particular ordinance helpful? I think that in my experience, bars, nightclubs, and businesses that have a history of drunken patrons, violent behavior, assaults, that type of thing, it gives us an opportunity to be able to address that. If you've got an apartment building that's plagued with violence, drugs, and disorder, again, we think that the people that own that building or manage that building need to be a part of the problem-solving process and not expect that all of the resources of the city are going to be poured into that. So they've got, say over, their caretaker and manager and their security and the lighting of the parking lot and all of those other things that we would work with them on. Single-family homes that have repeat issues with violence, weapons, and narcotics. This doesn't come up very often, but it does come up, where you've got one house that can literally upset an entire neighborhood. And so this is our opportunity to be able to do that as well. So it doesn't really specify whether it's a single family or rental, doesn't specify if it's a domicile or a business. The ordinance applies to all. Oftentimes, what we've seen, or in my experience, when somebody calls and says, hey, I got this letter, or this is the second letter, that gives us an opportunity in public safety to say, we would be willing to meet with you and enter into a crime mitigation plan. And that crime mitigation plan could spell out specifically what they needed to do to address crime or other issues associated with their property with the assistance of public safety staff. We've seen a lot of great things that have happened that way. So in the way of an apartment building, for example, we could say, here's some things that we would like you to do. We'd like you to change the entrance so that the entrance to the building is secure. We would like you to make sure that the door to the laundry areas is secure so that people aren't going into there and stealing from the laundry machines or taking other people's property. We could say that we need you to improve the lighting in the back of the building where people seem to gather. But that crime mitigation plan obviously looks different for a liquor serving establishment than it would for an apartment building, but it does give us that ability to kind of start that process of problem solving with them. So a couple of examples, again, problems at a bar or nightclub. You could have problems with assaults. You could have problems with bars that are over-serving. There's places where drug sales or use are going to be a problem, or there could be a lack of training and security. So this is one of the things that we would do, or a tool that we would have potentially in our toolbox to be able to deal with that. After mounting fines, a crime mitigation plan can be looked at, and changes to liquor serving, security, noise issues. It's essentially giving us a tool to get them to move in the direction of bringing that establishment into something that's more lawful and safer for the folks that patronize the place. Number two, again, this comes from my experience, not just theoretical, but a privately owned home. In this particular case, it was the mother of the resident in Columbia Heights. If you were related to the person that owned the house, you didn't have to have a rental license, so that tool did not come into play for us. Multiple search warrants, fights, violence, shooting, stabbings. The mother was sympathetic toward her child, as many parents would be. Was not really allowing us to be able to work more effectively. And once the fines got to be in the thousands of dollars and we started assessing the cost of our public safety staff to include the officers that were serving search warrants and our investigations, eventually they did vacate that property. Example number three would be apartment-related drugs and violence. Again, I think that if you looked at our crime statistics or you did a ride-along with one of our police officers and you said, tell me the 3 top apartment complexes that have problems with drugs, disorder, and violence, they could just rattle it off for you. So this gives us an ability as a city to have some amount of leverage with some of these property owners. It's not a replacement necessarily for rental licensing, but it's another tool in our toolbox that we can leverage. Again, in this particular example, we had the owner of the property who entered into a crime mitigation plan, significantly lowered the problems. He then stopped complying with the crime mitigation plan. We had more and more problems, and in the entire time I was there, he was the only one whose rental license was revoked for cause. So that was just a couple of examples that I wanted to give you. So a question that you may have is, how often is something like this even utilized? Columbia Heights has a population of about half of what Maplewood does. There are about 20,000 people. So in Columbia Heights in 2017, there was 57 letters that went out for a first violation. There was 17 that went out for a second violation, and there was 8 that had 3+. Now, some of that might have been 4 properties, right, that all got multiples there. But I think that the point that I wanted for you to understand is that most people kind of get their act together after the first or second letter. Most people are not actually getting fined because we're calling them, we're sending this, we're inviting them to work with us, to sit down to problem solve and to do other things. And so even though it sounds like it's an ordinance that, you know, really could be something that was kind of tough on the community, it really doesn't turn out to be that way. Again, in an entire city, in an entire year, only 8 of these incidents ended in some sort of a fine. The fine in Columbia Heights by their ordinance was $250. Obviously, Maplewood can impose whatever fine they feel is appropriate. In summary, the nuisance calls for service ordinance is only one tool in our toolbox. Frankly, I'm excited that we're looking at rental licensing. I think it's another good and important tool. None of these tools on their own solves all of the issues that our citizens would have concerns with or that the council would have concerns with. But I think the combination of some of these proactive tools can give us an ability to encourage lawful behavior and safety. The ordinance imposes fines and incentives for owners and occupants to be law-abiding and ensure a safer environment. And it seeks to ensure that law enforcement and public safety resources are available for our entire community, not just committed to problem properties, so that everyone who is in our city that's paying for public safety should have equal access to it. Not saying that, you know, problems don't crop up, but we want to make sure that in some cases these repeat calls for service properties are dealt with more effectively. Also included in your packet is a sample ordinance that Attorney Ron Beatty took a look at and customized for the city of Maplewood. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, I will say, great presentation. I mean, one of the things I wake up in the middle of the night about it are these repeat offenses, particularly at homes where the neighbors are extremely frustrated. And there doesn't seem to be any leverage, right? They have meetings, they do this, they do that, and so finally, here is a tool that can start to give some leverage. And I really liked your example of sort of naming the top apartments. I mean, we have one really problem apartment, we have one really problem bar or more, we have one really problem drug house or more that people have had it with, and we've not been able to solve that. And more so, they just call us, and then they feel, you know, again, I'm trying to get away from this. That's why I'm so happy to see this, is they just feel they kind of give up on the city. You know, city's just not going to do anything about these issues. So this gives us, I think, a really good tool to start to get on top of these issues and to say, hey, you are part of the city and you have to behave in a certain way, right? So if you're going to be selling drugs in your house, or you're going to have fights in your bars or your apartment buildings, you're not going to fix the toilets, and you're not going to do a lot of, you know, have some really serious issues, that we do have some leverage. So as far as my reaction, I am really glad to see this. I just have one question. So it would not necessarily replace rental housing. It'd be sort of used in rental housing enforcement. It would be used in tandem with it, right? Is that, Mr.
Mayor,
Chief
that's
Nadeau?
correct. In the city that I came from, we had, I think, a very good and somewhat progressive rental housing program. We had a lot of rental housing in Columbia Heights. And so this tool was used in tandem with rental licensing on rental properties. One thing that's noteworthy is that this ordinance, as we did it in Columbia Heights, did not specify per apartment. It was per building. So if you've got a building with 12 units, you know, the third letter, you know, the owner of that building had to pay $250. So that is one thing that's noteworthy as it applies to rental.
Yeah, I think in our experience down in South Maplewood, we want the owner to be the one calling attention to. So, Councilmember Juneman?
Thank you. All I can say is, where was this when we had a certain nightclub on Rice and Larpenter? Never would have gotten to the level it was at, shall we say. And I like the fact that it's seen as a tool, and it's not meant to be a broad-based punitive hammer. But it would be really nice, I think, even our court enforcement people, we have a couple of houses they've been working on for 2-3 years that involve lots of different issues. But some of it's just it's kind of like trying to chase a piece of Jell-O around a tabletop. It's just beyond their grasp that with this would probably have been given them another way to get at it sooner. And I think people need to realize also that many times these also involve either mental health issues or public health issues that you can't get at unless you've got something like this in place first to peel that off the top and get to what started the whole thing. And I do believe that people think or used to think anyway, that we were outside the idea that, well, you know, we wouldn't have a house where a mother protected her felonious child. Wrong. People do that, and we've had a couple, and so we do know that. And I just think it kind of takes all the little grooves and separations that are in the other rules that people, and after a while, people get to know how far they can go with the other ordinances and still stay under the apparent radar. And so this one kind of fills in the gaps, and I think sometimes if people knew we could take care of the whole package, some of the behavior would change much sooner. And I agree that we have to have the rental ordinance too. I mean, that's a given. But even that, as you said, won't take care of it if there's not something like this. And unfortunately, I just think that it's been this way a long time. We're just finally getting to the point where we're willing to say, look, there are just some people that don't get it unless you take out the hammer and hit them inside the head. I mean, it's just kind of where we are on that type of thing. And I know that if we had the rental ordinance and this one in my own neighborhood along 12 years ago, there would have been a lot less time spent by some of us neighbors peeking out our window like 8 hours at a time going, oh, dear Lord, will they just blow themselves up or something, please? I mean, it was one thing after the other, and we, of course, being activists, did finally take care of it ourselves by getting hold of the landlord and basically beating him up with our mouths. And he didn't like being accosted all the time, so he finally gave up and sold it as an owner-occupied. But, you know, it shouldn't really be on the neighbors to get to that level. And so this would help a lot in those kinds of situations, because this was one where the behavior was not really about it being a rental. It was about the owner never fixed up, and he never responded to what his occupants were doing. And so somewhere along the line, the rock has to drop on the right person. And I think this is just a great boulder, might I say, to be dropped from the sky.
Mayor
Like
and
it.
Councilmember June, I couldn't agree more. I mean, 30 years in law enforcement has shown me that rental properties are not a problem. Those that are not effectively managed can be a big problem in a neighborhood and affect the safety of the other people that live in that building. And that's obviously all a huge concern for me. The one that I talked about where eventually after years of trying to work with the landlord, they eventually revoked the license within just months. I mean, the buildings that he owned in 3 different complexes normalized to the rest of the neighborhood. And that just goes to show you that you need a person that's involved. You need a person that utilizes best practices, that screens effectively and brings in the right people. Doesn't matter if they might have been convicted of a crime before or something, but you know, you have to do a screening to make sure that you're bringing good people into that building, good people into that neighborhood. So I completely agree.
And Mayor? Yeah. And I also think it's only fair to the other people that live in a building. You know, you can have one that just, with these repeated calls where there's chaos constantly, and if that person just wasn't there anymore, or if the building was cleaned up to the point where that kind of person wasn't attracted to it, the other people could live better. So I think it's about, sometimes an apartment building is a mini neighborhood.
Right.
And I think we owe it to the people to help them live in a decent place. I like it. Thank you. Councilmember Abrams.
Thank you, Mayor. I too like this idea. I think the fact that we're adding tools for staff, I think would be very empowering to staff. Do you know, I mean, what do the officers think about this idea in the department? Do you know?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Abrams, when we came up with the strategic plan, there's actually a strategic plan action step where I'm supposed to be introducing this to the council. Because of the different workshop agendas and stuff, this has gotten bounced a few times, so I was supposed to have this done by May. So I'm a little behind the schedule, but this was something that we talked about. Obviously, the folks in Maplewood are not used to this type of an ordinance, but I think they clearly, like you, have seen the benefit that can come from it. And I'm sure that they get as frustrated with having responded to these same problem properties for violence, drugs, drunkenness, and other issues. And so I think that they see it and they understand that there would be a benefit there.
Councilmember Abrams?
Thank you. Because I view this as an option that staff can use when they're out there, depending on the issue. I'm definitely in favor of the rental housing ordinance as well, and I see the two of them working together. They're very different, because what I see really is the value of the rental housing ordinance is the fact that we can make sure that all of the rental housing in our city meets certain standards in terms of water and electricity and safety and lead paint or whatever it may be that's going to be included in there, that we are providing safe places for families to live, for people to live, for seniors to live. And this really addresses, I think, a different issue. They can work together because the property may be, run afoul of both of these new types of ordinances that we're looking at, but I think that they can work together very well, and I'm definitely in favor of it. And I think that anyone who winds up with one of these fines should have to come to the council, as opposed to just maybe the city attorney hearing the appeal. I think it belongs up here at the council level so that we can really see and participate, because that's one of the things that I'm hearing out there in terms of residents, and this is, I think, a great tool for all of us to be able to put in place in our city. So thank you very much for bringing this forward.
Good feedback. I hope, is that enough feedback for you? Do you need anything further? I mean, you had the fine size and so forth, but I think, are you going to ask us more? You said Columbia Heights was 250. I don't know if everybody thinks that sounds okay with me. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mayor, you've got, like I said, the two pieces, and the one piece typically doesn't come into play. You can charge them for the cost of public safety. In the house that I described, where we had to have the SWAT team go 2 or 3 times to do narcotic search warrants, we started to check the wages of everyone that was associated with that and other things, and it was, as you might imagine, expensive. But yeah, typically the $250 is the fee that we have charged in Columbia Heights. It might be a good amount to start off with. I mean, as the council, I believe, reviews the fee schedule every year, it can certainly be raised at some other time, but I think that there's a difference between getting somebody's attention and kind of hammering on them, and I think $250, generally speaking, is going to get somebody's attention.
Okay. Thank you. City Manager Coleman?
Director Nadeau, I think this is one thing that it wasn't clear to me, and I hadn't thought to ask you this until now. So let's just hypothetically say that we have another event at the Myth and it goes badly and you're out there. Would you follow up with them after that event and say, okay, this is your first warning, next time, you have 2 more chances and you're going to get a fine? Is that kind of how that works? You put them on notice after the bad call or bad situation?
Director Nadeau?
Thank you, Mayor, City Manager Coleman. That's exactly what happened. We would, by the ordinance, have to send them a notice telling them about the date, the time, a description of the event, and then there would be language in that letter that they can contact with us with questions. Like I said, one of the greatest things I think to come out of this was when people got to the point of being fined, or even before they were fined, we would give them the opportunity to sit down with us and come up with some sort of a crime mitigation plan. And obviously, again, that looks a lot different for a liquor serving establishment. Maybe it meant that all of their folks had to get alcohol server training. Maybe it meant that they needed a person that could work the door on Friday and Saturday nights to prevent underage folks from coming in, that type of thing. But we in Columbia Heights had the discretion before going to council with that appeal that you can meet with us. If we can come up with certain criteria to try and problem solve this together, we always wanted to show them, an air of cooperation. Yeah. This isn't us against you, this is us with you. We just need you to get to the point where things are going to be safer there.
So, Mayor. One last
City
question.
Manager Coleman.
This question's for the council. I assume everybody's on board and that staff should go ahead and prepare an ordinance for your consideration?
Yes, thank you. And I think that, that idea of having a process, and I really like the idea of problem solving together. Sometimes when you have a problem, you don't talk to anybody, you think, I just can't solve it, I just can't solve it. And then you just share with someone, or they share with someone, the police, well, this is what's happening. And then you say, well, why have you tried this, right? I mean, so it's, I assume might be a relief to some people to actually be able to
Right.
think through strategies. And so Director Nadeau, I'm going to give you a compliment. Because I was out knocking door to door on Maryland, and a cop, former cop, older cop, retired cop, lives there, and he said, I hear your department's in good hands. And I said, yeah, I think so. And he said, yeah, I hear that the folks are really happy. And I said, that's what I'm hearing too. And so that is good for all of us too. And so your vision, your bringing tools to us are really important, because these are frustrations we've had for me, for 5 years. And so thank you, and know that people are noticing, as are we, and keep bringing stuff forward, because it's helpful.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. With that, anything else? We are adjourned. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock.